Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Please sign in for attendance. It's already open. Whoever brought this, thank you very much. It was very, very kindly of you. My mom's favorite candy is Twizzlers in the world. And every year at Halloween, I would dread getting Twizzlers because they'd be gone by the next morning. It was magic. Like, I bring Twizzlers home and they wouldn't be there the next day. A special place for Twizzlers, so I will consume some of these later. Your exams are ready to pick up. If you haven't already gotten it, Cindy, who sits right across the hall from me, room 623, she has them. Make sure you bring your exam number, because that's how she'll distribute them back to you. I want to go over very briefly the high-level exam. I sent you an email yesterday with some notes, but I want to go through this with you now. So the good news is you did pretty well. As a whole, you did well. Much better than my common law class. I never know why one class is better than the other. Maybe I'm not as good as a professor. Maybe the material's harder. I don't know. But you guys are actually in a pretty good state. I got the distribution here. The distribution was a 294. That's the mean, which is actually not that bad. Usually my final mean is about a 305, and the midterm is usually a little bit tougher because you just don't know as much. So this is actually a good spot to be for the midterm. Again, no one failed. The people who got D's, I think all of them blew the word limit. And when you blow the word limit, by the time you get to question number 5, I stop reading. So the people who got the low grades generally got a 0 for the last part. And when you get a 0 for the last part, it's very tough to get a good grade. There was an A+. Come collect your Hamilton ticket, whoever that was. We had a bunch of A's. We had 7 A's. We had 9 A minuses, a couple C's. But again, I am not worried about you. You guys did actually pretty well. Let me walk through some of the high level issues. This is a case. I'm sorry. This is a class that's based on cases. And if you want to pull yourself up, the way you're going to do that is by talking about cases. There's no way for me to sugarcoat this. Merely reciting a rule without giving me cases is not going to get you where you need to go. If you looked at my old exams, the old A+ answers, that's what you have to do. It's not going to be every question that will be a relevant case. Sometimes we've done sort of principles that don't have cases attached to them. But at a minimum, you're going to need to know how to discuss the various cases. And it's not just enough to say, O'Keefe, right, which is one word. You need to actually give me an analysis of why O'Keefe applies, why it's similar, or perhaps why it's different. Answer the question. This is the one that drives me the absolute craziest. The number one reason why people don't get good scores is they don't answer the question. They just don't. Maybe they're answering what I think I'm asking, or maybe they're writing something else that reminds them of an answer, but they're not answering the question. This is especially troubling when questions have multiple parts. I think there was one question on the exam that had 2 parts, and a goodly number of you only answered half the question. You just stopped. When you do that, you only get partial credit. So sometimes if it's a little bit easier question, I'll make it a 2-parter to make sure it gets you different angles. So be sure you're answering the question. This is why I encourage you at the outset to read the 5 questions very carefully, and mark up your paper as you're reading it, so that you know what you have to answer. There were a lot of papers that were pretty good and just didn't answer the question, and they get partial credit, 6 or 7 points maybe, but they're not going to get the 8s and the 9s. What else do we want to talk about? The number 5 question is always going to be your policy question. It's always how I structure it. And policy doesn't just mean what your opinion is, right? It's not enough just tell me, I think this is fair or not. You have to give me some rationales why. And, this was a question involving, I'm sorry, I think it's getting cut off. I forgot that screen's messed up. This was a question involving adverse possession, right? And we spent a lot of time talking about the fairness in terms of settling property rights and whether it's appropriate to yank property from people who have a connection to it, right? There are different arguments. I can only ask so many policy questions. If you go back through all of my old exams, you can probably make a survey of the things I've asked about, and the odds are I'll probably repeat it eventually. Maybe this year, maybe not, I don't know. I haven't written your final exam question, I won't write it until after the semester's over, but you can get a pretty good sense of what I'm going to ask about based on what I've done in the past. 1 minute. When I was taking Barbary, there was this one guy, he taught at the University of Virginia, and he had studied every Virginia bar exam for the last 40 years. And he used to say, I can tell you with a degree of certainty that one of these 5 questions will be on the bar. And like, without fail, every other guy was right. So I'm telling you, if you just look at my old exams, at the part 5, the policy one, you're probably going to repeat. It's inevitable. I don't have that many things to ask you about. Property is a fairly closed class. There aren't that many topics. The other part that I think all of you would benefit from in general is to very carefully compare your paper to the A+. Now, let me say this very clearly. The A+ was not 100. It was 43 out of 50, which is roughly 86, right? So it's good, but it's not perfect. And there are things that are probably wrong. And I promise you, when you start flooding my office today, you're going to say, wait a minute, Josh, person A wrote this, and I wrote this. I'm like, okay, actually, you're right, and this person's wrong, right? So that's going to happen. But at least see how the person structured their answer, because that is more important than the content. The structure, how you write the paper, is very important. Now, I was actually very happy. There weren't that many papers that were obvious when you ran out of time, right? How do I know you ran out of time? Your answer for number 5 is like 2 sentences, right? I know what that means. It's like, oh crap, just write something and be done with it. There were very few of those, so at least on its face, you weren't rushing. But one tip that I always will give you is budgeting your time. Okay, so how do you do this, right? You have 90 minutes for a question. 90 minutes for a question, right? You want to read the question carefully. I would give it, I mean this sincerely, read 30 minutes. Budget a solid 30 minutes for just reading the question and going over the calls, the 5 parts, right? Give yourself 30 minutes. You will save yourself so much more time in the back end if you get the question solid. If you start writing before the 20-minute mark, you're probably doing it wrong. Okay, if you want to give yourself 20 minutes, fine. But I would not even just put your pen down. Don't start writing till minute 30. Okay, so then you have an hour left for 5 questions, right? Division. That gives you roughly 12 minutes, not 20. Gives you 12 minutes for each of the 5 questions. Okay? What you have to do at home is practice writing a good answer in about 12 minutes. Maybe 15 minutes if you give yourself 20 at the front end. But do your math. And no, give each question equal time. Because they're each worth the same number of points, right? There's not like, question 1 worth more than question 5. They're worth the same. So if you put all of your effort into question number 1, and then by the time you get to question 5, you're out of steam, you're going to lose a lot more points. So when you do your practice exams at home, just time yourself. Give yourself 20, maybe 30 minutes to read the question, and then 12, maybe 15 minutes per part. And the discipline is, if you find yourself spending 20 minutes on a single question, you have to cut yourself off, right? You got to just say, stop, go on to the next one. Because you don't want to have to scramble and just put garbage out. It's an endurance contest. This was a 90-minute exam. Your final is 3 hours, so it's double that. And you get tired. We're human. There's fatigue that settles in. It's inevitable, right? You're going to have a bar exam where it's basically a marathon, 3 days. This is 3 hours. But you do have fatigue that settles in. So to the extent that you find yourself rushing, give yourself a schedule, right? Say from, let's say the exam starts at noon. From 12 to 12:30, read question, right? From 12:30 to 12:42, do question number 1. From 12:42 to 12:54, do question number 2. And actually write it out. And then cut yourself off when you get there. So you don't want to be on the last question, you're out of time. And they call time and you just submit. That is the worst thing. Now, by now, I think almost all of you signed up for time slots to come meet with me. I'm very happy about that. I like meeting with you. I actually do. It's a lot of work, but I think it's worth it because I don't ever get to see you outside of class. I don't get to know you. This at least gives you a 30-minute block. We can talk to you. We can talk one-on-one, see what's working for you, see what's not. This is designed to help you. I'll warn you, this is not going to be a walk in the park. I'm going to put you through the paces, right? I'm warning you, right? The way it works is if you come here and I say, so why did you write this? You say, I don't know. I'll say, okay, check your notes. And I'll ask you to look at your notes. I want to actually see how you're answering these questions. So please come prepared, bring your papers with you, understand what you put and why you put it. The more that you put into this, I promise, the more I can give you back. If you just come in and blow it off, then we'll talk about baseball for a bit, which is fun, but it's not going to help you get where you need to go. Okay, patiently waiting, Cody. I think you raised your hand like 20 minutes ago.
Oh, no, I wasn't raising my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you raised your hand. I had you on deck. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so questions other than that? But you guys did okay. My lecture for Convalate will not be quite as cheerful. But you guys are in good shape. I don't know, maybe property is easier, maybe people like it more, I don't know. Varies. Sometimes my convo is better than property. It fluctuates every year. I never quite know why it is what it is. I've even taught the same class, property 2, twice in a semester. And same Josh, same professor, totally different results in the classes, which it's always baffling. So any questions on that? Okay, but I want to work with you. I mean that. I do want, if you're going to help, I'm going to help you. But you have to step up, and I will do what I got to do. Okay? All right. Anything else? All right, let's do, hold on, I have to get this thing running. Okay. All right, so let's do a question for class for today. And this is a segue into our first case, Loretto. Okay, so your question is this, true, false. Under the police power, a city can require the installation of smoke detectors in an apartment building. Okay, that's your question. Under the police power, a city can require the installation of smoke detectors in apartment buildings. Okay, a few more seconds. Alrighty. Who's next? Ah, back up top, yes. Oh, that's right. Okay, yes. So, what'd you put here?
I'm going to say false.
You say false. Okay, why are you saying false?
Well, my gut instinct would have been to say true, but the way that you always word your true. There needs to be more on the end of the question for it to be true. There needs to be something else.
Okay. So Nicole, let's just walk through this, right? What's the argument beyond trying to psychoanalyze my question, right? Which I appreciate. You guys are catching on. We're class 23. I do appreciate that. So what's the argument about whether or not smoke detectors, right, would fall into the police power? Give me the argument for both sides at least.
Well, it makes sense for that to be the police power and to be allowed to do that because it's for safety reasons.
Good, okay. Now, what's the argument on the other side, Nicole?
Since it's a permanent thinking, there needs to be some sort of quarantine.
Yeah, what's that phrase? Permanent? What's that phrase from the case?
Physical thinking.
Oh, so close. Oh, the other one. Non-invasion. Occupation. Yeah, you got it. Right, so Nicole's like this. She's like, look, it's a tough question because on the one hand, you have Loretto, which we'll study in a couple minutes, which says a permanent physical occupation is a taking. And Nicole, what happens when there's a taking? What must the government do? Money, right? They got to pay. On the other hand, I think Nicole makes a fair point. She says, having smoke detectors in a building is a good idea, right? It prevents fires. It saves people's lives. This is like, smack dab in the middle of the police power protecting the welfare of the people. Because if you don't have a smoke detector in apartment A, the entire building can burn down, right? And you have 100 people now without a home. Maybe people die, get injured. Right? Casey, what's your take here? Which way do you cut? Trying to psychoanalyze me.
I put true because I distinguished it from Loretto.
Oh, okay, good.
That a cable is not necessary for anything. That's for entertainment purposes, and a smoke detector really is for safety.
So what if I said instead of a Loretto cable, we're talking about a phone line, which I think is pretty important.
I don't think that that's absolutely necessary.
Okay. A pipe to bring water to the sprinklers.
I would say that that was
Ah,
absolutely necessary.
so you're going to judge how close the installation is to the case. Now, is that what you're? Okay. By the way, distinguishing cases for exam, good, right? The way I write these questions is I take a case you studied and I twist it a little bit and I make it a little bit similar, a little different. Saying why this is similar or different, that is very good for lawyering too, not just my exams. But what you'll find as an attorney is the precedents are never exactly on your side if they are going to settle the case. It's always going to be maybe this, maybe that. So distinguishing is good. Antonella, what's your take here?
I put true as well.
Okay, well, why'd you go through?
Because I think that it is under the police power, because of the general welfare.
But what about what Nicole said? What about, is this a taking? Is this an occupation by forcing to drill these smoke detectors into the wall?
I'd say it's a taking because it's permanent.
Well, but is it permanent? Is that like, is that smoke detector gonna be there like till the second coming, right? It's gonna be there forever.
Maybe not that particular one, but usually in like a fire zone, there's regulations that if you don't have your fire detector working, then you're getting in trouble.
I mean, usually they have to be inspected like every year or two, right? And they take them off the wall, they check the batteries, put it back up, right? Is that permanent? You take it off the wall, pop the batteries out, put it right back in. That doesn't seem so permanent to me.
I mean, I guess it's not like permanent that it's on the wall 24/7.
Is anything permanent? What is permanent? Stormy, what's permanent? Is anything permanent in the world?
I mean, no, I don't think so.
No, what'd you put here, Stormy?
I put true because I thought that it was under the police power, but, I mean, even if it is a taking, you can still do it.
What? Whoa, no. Be careful with terminology here. If it's under the police power, it's not a taking. If it's a taking, it's not under the police power. These are separate categories, right? Be very careful. If it's a taking, it's not within the police power. If it's within the police power, it's not a taking. The key distinction, my friends, is compensation, right? Once you're in the police power, it's free. The government can do whatever it wants, right? But once you shift over to the takings clause, okay, then you got to pay. And you have to have a proceeding from a court also. Tyler, you have a dad?
I think that it is part of the police powers because it is not constituted as a taking. It is the general welfare as well as, like you said, it's not like they're making you add on a garage to your apartment or your house, which is a permanent fixture. This is This is a removal, temporary.
So it's temporary property. So you're saying this installation is temporary?
I think it's temporary. If you would call it a taking, it's a temporary taking, which we call the balancing test.
Oh, so you're saying it's not Loretto, it's something else.
Does it make a difference that in Loretto was a third party who was doing it, so they were giving up some of their property rights, whereas if you were just installing a fire detector, a third party's not coming in and taking any of your...
Well, in Loretto, wasn't there a law at issue? Did Miss Loretto have a choice whether to negotiate with this cable company? No, she didn't. Anyone else want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I know just you're discussing about like smoke detectors, but also if you look at the totality, because like cities they require like an apartment that requires like smoke detector, fire escape, fire door, and like they're very strict about like the doors have to be so wide and
So why is this not all a taking, right? You're forcing someone to install a fire escape. Everyone know what a fire escape is, right? This is like, outside of an apartment building, you have these steps, right? These ladders that you can climb down. You ever see like West Side Story, right? They don't have fire escapes in Houston? It's a New York thing, I don't know. Delilah, you're actually next on deck. You changed your mind? I'll come back to that, okay. Yeah.
I remember reading about just the permanent fiscal occupation, and the Constitution upholds the rule that it's a taking without regards for the public interest.
Good. Right. So this question, I'll move on in a minute. Let's see the results. I don't see people vote on this one. Oh wow! Look at that. Okay. So virtually everyone. Nicole, I don't think you're wrong. Actually, I think it's a close call, and this is an issue that the majority and the dissent in Loretto argue over a lot. Right. The test, under the test put forward by the majority, this is a taking, right? It's false. Under the test put forward by the majority, it's a taking. But at the very end, Justice Marshall says, but don't worry, this doesn't affect things like smoke detectors and fire escapes and mirrors and other sorts of things. But then you got the dissent, right, by Justice Blackmun, no relation. He was like, wait a minute, if we take this literally, then anytime you drill anything into a wall, whether it's a smoke alarm or whatever else, that's a taking. So the Loretto case, I think, is a very good starting off point to discuss this topic of takings. All right? So we start, as we always do, with our text of the Constitution. And it says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So again, our focus is on the word taken, or taking, if you will, right? When is some governmental policy taking, and when is it just merely an exercise of the police power? The court has never drawn a line of any sort of clarity between the two. So your challenge in the next 2 or 3 weeks or so is to try to figure out where is that line. I'm warning you. This is one of the more confusing topics of the semester. I promise you. I actually love property because we very rarely talk about the Supreme Court. Truth. Whenever the Supreme Court gets involved, they screw stuff up, right? It just makes it more complicated for you. So unfortunately, from this point out, we're all SCOTUS, right? We're all Supreme Court decisions. And there are different approaches to the takings clause, okay? So the first approach, which we'll be talking about today, is what's called a categorical regulatory taking. A categorical regulatory taking. Delilah, what does this word categorical mean? It's the title of the reading for today. It's in the reading a couple spots. How do we understand this word categorical? Good. Oh, good. So per se, give me a definition. Categorical per se. What's that mean, Delilah?
I believe. Well, I remember per se is that if you're in violation of some ordinance or some statute, it's automatically liable.
Good. So the key word Delilah says automatically. That's exactly correct, right? In law, there's something called a categorical approach, right? A categorical approach means when you fit into a specific category, the law is automatically going to be violated, right? Think of like in torts, you have a strict liability offense, right? If you do certain types of offenses, there's no balancing. It's straight up, per se, automatic liability. So when you see the word categorical, think of for your torts class, per se, negligence per se, or strict liability, right? There's no balancing. If topical humor, but statutory rape is a crime no matter what. There's no defense of consent. There's no defense of intoxication, right? It's a crime. Once you fall into the category of statutory rape, done, right? The house of cards tumbles. Oh, too soon. There it is. There it is. Sorry. Had in space tonight. Anyway, so the idea of a categorical regulatory taking is automatic. I think Delilah used the exact right word. So the Loretto case teaches that when you have a certain type of a regulation, in this case one that requires that you literally drill a hole into a wall, right? You fit into this category, and automatically taking. So I give you an easy rule for this one, right? If you need a hammer or a screwdriver to do something, it's a categorical taking. Right? This is an easy rule. If you literally need a hammer or a screwdriver to do something, like some sort of tool, we're talking about a categorical regulatory taking. So in this case, that's to install the wire on the wall, right? Okay. That's the general rule. The general rule. Okay? It gets harder though. Okay? Okay? What happens if you're talking about a law that doesn't require a hammer or a screwdriver? When you're outside this idea of categorical regulatory takings, you have what's called balancing. right? You have a balancing test. That we're going to cover next class, right? When the government's not making you install something, you apply a balancing test. And the test is called Pensential. You're going to hate it, trust me. I hate it. I teach it every year. It's hard. But when you're in this categorical zone, we apply the Loretto test, right? It's an automatic per se taking. When you're outside of categorical, you apply what's called a balancing test, which is from a decision called Pensential. It involves a Grand Central Station in New York City, the huge train station. Okay? So don't worry about the balancing test quite yet. Enjoy the simplicity of today, where it's a categorical taking, there's no balancing required. But next class, we'll start talking, actually the class after as well, we'll talk about balancing. Okay? So these are the various tests for regulatory takings. Okay? One second, I'm almost done, I promise. The final day of class will have what's called an actual taking. Right? This is when they bulldoze your house. Right? This is where they literally take your property. Right? This is a kilo case. When the government's literally taking your property and making something else out of it, they're just taking away your fee simple. Okay? That's easy. That's an actual taking. So there's like a spectrum, right? They're drilling something into your wall, it can be categorical. They're diminishing the value, there's this balancing test. And then when they actually take your property straight up, you have an actual taking. These are all going to be different tests which overlap to varying degrees. I am not going to pretend that there's an easy answer for this. You have to just read the cases very carefully.
So you said that the Loretto test applies to your hypo from earlier about the smoke detector, except that there's a caveat that they said it doesn't apply to that.
Yeah, so the problem is the Loretto test isn't consistent with the smoke test itself, right? So if you read the first, 80% of the opinion, smoke detectors are out. But at the very end of Marshall's opinion, he says, oh, well, this doesn't affect smoke detectors and stuff like that. So, the impact of Loretto has not been as big as the dissent vote was. The dissent vote is the worst in the world, or 35 years later, not that big of a deal. Good question. But today, all we're focusing on is the idea of a categorical regulatory taking. The Raisin case, the cable TV case, right? Once you fit in this category, you are outside the balancing world. You're per se, you're strict liability. You got to pay. Anthony?
So the answer to the question is false?
I don't think there's a right answer.
Okay.
I think.
No right.
No, this is why I will never give a multiple choice exam. I would never put this question on exam because I don't think it's fair. I deliberately phrase these questions to stimulate debate. I don't always think there's a right answer. I think under the test in Loretto, the answer is false. But under the opinion in Loretto, I think the answer is true. If that makes sense. Right? If we actually take the test from Justice Marshall's opinion seriously, I think Nicole's correct. Right? But if we look at Marshall's opinion as a whole, I think the rest of them are correct. It's all right. No, we're Nicole. You're in good shape. You're in good shape. That's another hand somewhere. Yeah. Writing notes. Blackman has no idea. No. You think I would know the answers to my own questions, but they often don't have good answers. All right, so let's see the case. I think, Anna, you next? All right, you want to walk through the facts, please, of Loretto?
There was a New York statute that allowed a cable television company.
By the way, CATV is cable TV, just so you know. Okay.
They allowed this cable television company to install cable in apartment buildings to them by landlord. And then the landlord wasn't allowed to interfere or charge the tenants or anything like that. I think they could get a reasonable fee from the state,
Mm-hmm.
which was $1.
Good.
And then, so the appellant in the case bought the building, realized it had this cable, and then she brought a class action against the cable company.
Very good. And what was her allegation in the suit? Very good. Yeah, so just finish up, Annie, you're almost done. Why is it a trespass?
Because they went on the property without the consent.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you so much. So, you may not know the history of cable TV, so I'll give you a little bit of a background. Back in the day, if you wanted TV, it was over the air. And there were only like 7 or 8 channels. So there was innovation. Television over a cable, over a wire. And the idea was on a single cable, you could put many different channels, and then you tune your TV, depending what the tuning is, you get a different TV station to watch, right? Okay, so how do you get cables to all the homes in the places populated as Manhattan? You can't always put up poles. You can't always run wires in the phone company, because they may not want these upstart cable companies competing with them. So initially, these cable companies had an idea. You ever see Spider-Man movie, right? In Manhattan, all the buildings are very close to each other. The same way that Spider-Man would swing from one to the next, you would just dangle cables, right? So you're building A wire connecting over the edge, building B, building C, building D. So they basically cross over from one building to the next, right? Everyone understand the technology. Initially, the cable company said, we need to give some compensation, right? We need to give some goodies to the landlords to let us drill wires in their building. They said, we will give you a percentage, with 5%, and we'll give you a cut of whatever money is derived from the subscription fees, because you pay a monthly fee for cable and they give a cut for it. Fine. But then the cable companies got smart and said, wait a minute, why are we being so stupid here, right? Why are we trying to negotiate with every single apartment building on a case-by-case basis? Let's just lobby the New York legislature, pass a law that says they're required to give us this license, and we'll pay up $1, right? $1. It's not that much money, whatever. But the important part is there's no negotiation. In the past, it was an arm's length transaction on a case-by-case basis, and a landlord reserved the right to say, no, don't drill this thing in my wall. But as a consequence of this New York law, there was no choice. The government said, we've determined that having cable TV is an important thing for our people, and we're going to make you put these wires for your building, and we'll give you compensation in the form of $1. And if you look at this picture, it's hard to see in the black and white. You see over here like this little conduit? I mean, that's the cable. And if you look at it quickly, you won't even notice it's there. It's pretty, a couple inch, half an inch small, whatever the size happens to be. Okay, so Loretto decides to bring a lawsuit, right? Jillian, so what do you think Loretto sought to gain from this lawsuit? I mean, how much money do you think she actually thought she'd be getting from this? Not much. I think this was a plaintiff's lawsuit, just for the plaintiff lawyers. I don't think there was much money at hand here, right? I think the attorney's fees would be far greater than any of the actual damages. Because if the government wanted to, they can use what's called eminent domain and actually use the process to install this. And maybe just get a couple bucks. So I think this was actually a boon for plaintiff lawyers, which is almost always the case in these sorts of class actions. That's fine. So Jillian, her argument was, by making me install the wire in my building, the government is affecting and taking in my property, right? How did her arguments fare in the lower courts, in the New York court system?
Ruled against her.
Yeah, they did.
And they said that it was constitutional and accepted and her law.
Yeah, Avery? Yeah, Avery. What's the argument that requiring the installation of these cable TV signal things is part of the police power? What's the argument there?
Well, they're like eliminating like landlord fees and everything that if they didn't do this, I think it's already that they like open up the door.
Well, my question is a little bit simpler, right? Is giving people access to cable television police power? I think Casey suggested it wasn't, that it's not like smoke detectors on the station, right? These are people who want to watch HBO and watch Ted Turner and that's great, right? Is this actually, this is where Ted Turner got started by having these cable TV. That's why the Atlanta Braves got such a big following. But is this within the police power putting these wires out?
I think the lower courts thought it was because even in one building they didn't want the cable or something with the crossover cable. So So people in another building can get cable if they don't allow.
Bingo. Right, and that's an important point, right? Under the technology that existed at the time, the only way to service a block was for having each building with crossover, right? So if you had, 5 apart buildings in a block, and the one in the middle said, no, I don't want this on my building, the entire block didn't have cable TV at that point. So what the government said is, in order to have this efficient, effective distribution of television for the people, we need to have consistent crossovers. In other words, no holdovers. You can't have one landlord saying no, because if one landlord says no, the entire block is dark. They can't get their TV signal. Right? You don't want that. So again, I think the lower courts ruled against the Loretto, and the case goes up to the Supreme Court. Okay? So, Mike, tell me, describe the majority opinion. How did the court go about its analysis?
Well, they went to Penn Central first, and they said the historical rule was upheld there, and law considered physical intrusion by government as a violation of the Takings Clause.
Well, is this case governed under the Penn Central standard?
Well, they kind of related it to it. But
Well, Mike, I mean, we didn't study Penn Central, but I mentioned a moment ago. What is the framework for Penn Central? What sorts of things is the government looking at? We described it a couple minutes ago. When do you go to Penn Central?
so you're talking about the Takings Clause?
Well, that's true. Do you always apply the Penn Central test? You guess not, Jesse?
When it's regulating use, you use the Penn Central test. When it's permit physical occupation, you use the...
Okay. You're both on the right track, okay? The answer here is you apply Penn Central when it's not Loretto. I know you're going to hate me for this one, right? It's circular. When you're going to go to Penn Central land, it means we don't have a categorical regulatory taking. Okay? You only apply Penn Central when you don't have a categorical regulatory taking. Let me brag for a second. So, don't start your inquiry, right, on the exam or otherwise, just saying, we're going to apply Penn Central. If you start there, you're probably going to get the question wrong. You have to start your inquiry saying, number one, is this going to be under Loretto? That's where you start your inquiry. Promise me this one, because you're going to screw up otherwise. You say, do we start here in the Loretto? Is this categorical? If the answer is yes, you stop. You stop at Loretto. But if the answer is no, then you may need to go on to Penn Central. Not necessarily, but you probably will. So always start your analysis with categorical Loretto. That's why I make this the first case in your unit, right? This is the first case for a reason. Bradley, answered your question? I knew I would. Okay, good. You get a premonition after a while about what's going to answer questions. It's a sixth sense that I've gained over the years. Spider-Man, the sense is tingling. Okay. So you always start yourself with this categorical test. And the court gives this framework, right? These two different phrases. A permanent physical occupation and a temporary physical invasion. Okay? A permanent physical occupation and a temporary physical invasion. Now, I want to highlight a word that's in both of them, right? Physical. Okay? That's important. The defining characteristic of Loretto, remember hammer and nail, screwdriver. There has to be something physical that's actually changed. You're going to drill something into a wall, right? You're going to install a box on a ceiling or on a roof. Okay? It has to be physical. This is not what we might call land use, right? For example, the government says you can't build more than 30 stories in a certain place, right? They haven't required you to actually do anything to your property. They're regulating how you're using it. I think this is what Mike said a few minutes ago. To be in this category of Loretto, you have to have something physical. And the case gives a couple examples, right? One of which is flooding. This is actually going to be a very big issue for Houston. So actually, let me take a slight detour. People who live near the reservoirs, right? Barker and Addicts, they've had flooding for a very long time in their properties. There have been lawsuits filed arguing that the flooding from the reservoirs is permanent physical occupation. Right? So the exact question I'm about to ask you is not like some sort of hypothetical whatever. This is a legal issue that's premised right now. Because usually when there's flooding, it's during a storm, right? And when the storm goes away, the water recedes. But in our circumstance here in Houston, the Army Corps has made deliberate decisions to flood certain areas at certain intervals. Why? They want to prevent the dam from bursting, right? So this is like the situation where no one wins. And just let me pause here, because you may have read about this in the paper. It's a pretty big issue. The dams in Houston were not meant to hold as much water that fell during Harvey. So the Army Corps had a decision. Do you flood upstream or do you flood downstream? That is, do you flood the places near the reservoir, or do you flood the homes at the end where the bayous dump out? They chose both, right? So they basically flooded both upstream and downstream. And these are the areas that are somewhat uninhabitable to this day. Even now, we're in November. They still can't go back to their homes because they're still doing these controlled releases. So a number of lawsuits have been brought against the federal government, against the Army Corps of Engineers, asserting that these controlled releases are amounting to letter A, right? They're not temporary, they're permanent physical occupation. So there's going to have to be a litigation on this issue. There are cases where the government builds a dam and they permanently put someone's home underwater, right? Forever. The dam's going to be there forever. That's an easy case. But what about, where every week for a couple hours water floods through, then it kind of washes away? Is that permanent? My own reading of the case, when I've done a little bit of homework on this, is it's not clear. I don't think there's a clear answer. But there have been almost 60 lawsuits filed by homeowners in Houston, right here, on this exact question. What is the meaning of permanent? How permanent does that have to be? Eventually the water recedes. All water always does. Is it, let's say you can use your home, 4 days out of the week and 3 days it's underwater. Is that permanent? I'm trying not to be callous, but these are the sorts of questions that the courts are going to have to consider. I don't know if the homeowners in Houston will be prevailing. I think it's a tough question. But this is a legitimate issue which I don't think I've had to fight before. Okay? So back to Loretto. Any questions on that, by the way? I was listening to Houston Matters yesterday. Mayor Turner was on, and someone was asking about this. Like, okay, I'll finish this in class tomorrow. Yeah, David.
What about like trespass?
Well, that's the argument, right? That the release of the water is effectively a trespass. But when a private party trespasses, you arrest them. When the government trespasses, you sue for a taking, right? That's the idea. When the government trespasses on your property, it's actually a taking. Yes.
But don't they have an absolute privilege in this situation since the taking was to prevent all of Houston? Or the more damage or more substantial damage?
That's what the government's going to argue, right? They're going to argue that if we didn't do these releases, the entire city was washed away. Right? Just think about this for a moment. If the Barker and Addicts Reservoir, if those dams burst, there were hundreds of thousands of fatalities. I'm not exaggerating, right? You'd have this massive wave of water washing all the chemicals and everything else, all the crap in the city, right? You'd have massive fatalities. Like, I'm not minimizing that. So your point, Lauren, I think is very, very astute. But now your homeowner said, well, why did you flood me, not that guy, right? Why didn't you flood downstream more than upstream? And these are sorts of arguments we're going to make.
Robert, so is the government saying that they assume the risk by living so close to that reservoir?
I don't know if there's an assumption of risk because they have what are called these floodplains, like 500-year floodplains, where it's like if you live in here, there might be a massive flood every 500 years. A lot of the places that flooded were not any of those plains. They had no risk of flooding, and therefore no reason to buy insurance. There just wasn't a need. The reason why is that they weren't near a bayou, they were near the reservoir, and the reservoir basically let water out on the block. Very tough questions, and just, they were making decisions in very quick time with the water coming down, and they didn't know what happened if they went the other way, right? If they didn't make these releases, maybe the dam would have burst, and you'd have massive fatalities. Yeah, Robert?
So is that a defense to it, that it was necessary for it to
Yeah,
happen?
yeah. So there are actually cases on this, right? Let's say there's a fire in a downtown area. And let's say there are 5 houses in a block, and there's a fire in the first house. Can the police demolish the second house to prevent the fire from spreading? Right, so think about this, right? If the police do nothing, they can't stop the fire. It burns house 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What if they just knock down house number 2, and they know which way the wind's blowing, right? They just knock down house number 2, and they save houses 3, 4, and 5. Or let's give another example, right? Let's say that there's a fungus on on plants or on a tree or something, right? And if this fungus keeps spreading, it's going to destroy an entire harvest for an entire area. Can the government just chop down tree number 2 to prevent the spreading, or just wipe out or burn a field in the middle to prevent this fungus from spreading?
Yes.
You're saying yes. The answer is yes, but it's a close call. There are cases on this. And these are cases that are going to be cited in the Houston litigation, which I've been reading up on a little bit. One more, yeah.
So is it also the case with the burning houses that the government isn't required to pay for the house they knock down, even if it is necessary?
That's exactly right. They're going to say the decision to knock down the guy's house, even though they're literally taking his home, is going to be police power, and they don't have to pay for it. Right? If you call 911, there's a fire in your house, and the firefighter takes an axe and knocks down your door, I don't think you can send them a bill, right? Right? You're not sending the guy a bill for knocking down your door. I mean, maybe you can. I don't think he'll get paid. Anyone else in this? Pay attention to this issue. It's going to be, I think, a very significant Fifth Amendment case that goes up. I don't know the answer. So Loretto then gives us this test, right, which talks about permanent physical occupations and temporary physical invasions. And again, the key word there is physical. It has to be something physical. Flooding of water, drilling a hole in the wall, hammering a box onto the roof, whatever it happens to be. So then we have the other part. Is it permanent or temporary? Is an occupation or an invasion? These are lovely words, like space invasion, right? Occupation suggests more of a permanence to it, whereas invasion suggests only temporary, although occupied Europe, whatever. But how do we draw the difference between a permanent and a temporary physical invasion? Who's next? Paige, I think you're next, right? So how does the court decide whether drilling this wire into the wall is a permanent or a temporary invasion?
I know they talked about it's more permanent when you lose all of your bundle of rights, basically.
Let's talk about the bundle of rights. Give me a little bit more on that page, please. Very good.
So if the government comes in and permanently physically occupies your property, then you no longer have the right to possess or
Yeah. So Paige makes a very good point. So right here, right, you all see this picture, this little wire going down the side, and you see the little cable going this way and going this way, right? Paige, can the landlord do anything else in this little strip of land? Can they do anything else right there? Right. Well, they actually probably could. I was actually thinking about this. Put Christmas lights on it, right? Maybe you do something to it. But generally speaking, those however many inches, that entire stick was destroyed, right? In the bundle of sticks, that stick is gone. If the landlord sells their building to another person, and that other person, say, wants to build, Christmas lights there, they can't do it. So what the court says is, this permanently destroys that stick in the bundle. They can't do anything there. And therefore, it's a permanent physical occupation, right? It eliminates the right to possess, the right to use, and the right to dispose. And critically, the right to exclude. We say that in property, the most important stick in the bundle is the right to exclude. And here the government's telling Ms. Loretto, You cannot exclude whoever is using that inch of your property. You are required to negotiate with them and to give them that space, that there's no actual choice. Okay? So everyone get the general rule, right? That part is easy, right? This takes away the bundle. Now, Travis, my follow-up question to you is, who cares? It's a 1-inch strip, right? In a big building, you don't even notice it. It makes no difference. There's a brick wall. Does the court care that we're talking about a very small incursion? Does that matter?
No.
Don't we balance and wow, all these people can watch TV and there's a little stupid cable that don't even notice this. Does it matter?
No, it's per se.
Per se. Do we balance anything? No. That's the important point, right? When I say categorical, when I use categorical, what I'm talking about is automatic per se. I think Delilah said a few minutes ago, or it was Anna, right? It's automatic. No balancing. It doesn't matter how small the incursion is, right? It does not matter how small the incursion is. And this is an important point. The size of the occupation goes to how much compensation you get, right? If it's a very small incursion, you get maybe $1. But the question of compensation is separate from the question of whether there's a taking in the first place. Someone get that? Whether there's a taking is totally separate from how much money you get. In other words, you only calculate the compensation, whether it's just, once you get to the taking. If there's no taking, you're in police power land. And in the land of police power, when the fireman knocks your door with an axe, you don't get anything. Okay? Bradley.
Can you buy insurance on eminent domain or anything like this?
Can you buy insurance? You mean, will someone insure you against the government taking your property?
Literally.
I'm not familiar with it. I mean, insurance companies will sell you a policy for anything. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe.
It'd be really expensive.
I mean, you can pay lots of money. They'll give you a policy for anything. Yeah. I don't know what that would even be. Yeah, I don't know. Other questions? So the majority, right? The majority says when you have a permanent physical occupation, there's no balancing. It's an automatic per se rule. And as a consequence, the government has to pay. Now, the court here doesn't decide whether the $1 is appropriate. They just remand it back saying, well, let someone else decide if $1 is appropriate. And ultimately, that's what the court does. So all of this litigation was basically for nothing, right? Everyone understand that? That Loretto, after all this litigation, was in the exact same spot as when she started. In that the cable's still there, and she got $1. Who made out well? Her lawyer. Because her lawyer won. And I think her lawyer got fees. So that's why I'm saying this entire case was basically for nothing, right? I think the lawyer made out pretty good. Because Loretto got $1. Exactly what she was going to get before, and the residents probably hated her for making her go through this litigation and not having TV for a year. Okay, that's the majority. Yes, Bradley.
Is there any indication that this was whatever they call where it's a case that they...
A test case?
Yeah.
I don't know, actually. I suspect these are plaintiff lawyers trying to challenge the crossover cables. But maybe this was, they were in cahoots with the phone company or the cable company trying to set a test case. I don't think so. Yeah, Anthony.
A temporary physical invasion is not a per se taking.
No.
Okay.
Right. Let me make this point clear. If it's only temporary, you're outside Loretto, right? If you have a temporary physical invasion, you are not categorical. You're outside Loretto. And then you go downstairs to the Penn Central balancing test, right? You're only in Loretto. You're only in the categorical approach if you have this permanent physical occupation. Once you're temporary physical invasion, you fall down to Loretto. I'm sorry, you fall down to Penn Central, which we'll talk about next class, or the class after. And actually, I have a good news. I think we have a guest lecturer. What day is he coming? Yeah, so on the 7th, a week from today, a very good friend of mine, Justice Brett Busby from the 14th Court of Appeal, will be giving a guest lecture on the readings for that day. He actually litigated a lot of these cases when he was in practice. He does this every year. He loves doing it, so I always invite him back. So be sure you're well read for class on the 7th. But we'll cover Penn Central on Thursday. All right. Yes, Taylor.
When you're talking about the size of occupation, how that goes towards the compensation, that's different?
Yes.
Is that also only Loretta?
Well, the size of the incursion always matters for justifying compensation. But when you're in a categorical approach, it doesn't matter how small it is. When you get to Penn Central, which we'll talk about next week, the size matters, right? Depending how big the intrusion is, that determines whether or not there's a taking. All right, Travis, give us Justice Blackmun's dissent. What's going on there? Yeah, why is the majority making such a difficult decision here?
There's no right or wrong to it. Either it falls into that category or it doesn't. There's nothing to kind of distinguish.
So, with Travis, I'm good. I'm good. I have fallen on my face, not today, but I have fallen. This is actually a very dangerous classroom, the way the steps are. I don't know whoever designed it knows what we're doing. It's very dangerous, but I like moving around. Travis, what would the majority? What would the dissent do? Would the dissent have a categorical test at all? Good. So Justice Blackmun's dissent would get rid of the categorical test. He would say, let's just do everything case by case balancing test, right? What we're talking about here is a 1-inch cable. No one cares. It's for public good. Let it go, right? If all this is just for $1, we're wasting our time here. So Justice Blackmun would apply the Penn Central test to everything. Now, you may say, well, what's the big deal, Josh? Under the Penn Central test, the government always wins. Not always, almost always, but generally under the Penn Central test, it's so flexible, the government almost always wins. So what Justice Blackmun's saying here is, unless the government's taking your house, they can do it, right? Unless you have a physical, they're literally taking your property, the government should win. So this was a 6-3 decision by the court, and Justice Marshall, who was quite liberal, went along with the majority opinion. But he would allow it. But now, let's say William, right? So you're a litigator, right? And you're representing people who live near the reservoir in Houston. You're writing your briefs, right? What is going to be the most important decision for you when you're writing your brief? How are you going to frame the issue about the flooding near your community? What's going to be the most important question for the court to resolve?
Speaking from a Loretto
mindset. Yeah, flooding right near Barker's reservoir.
If this occupation of their property is permanent.
Bingo, or
temporary.
Right. So when you're a lawyer, right, and I'm sure there are people writing these complaints as we speak in Houston, your number one decision is trying to get into Category A. Trying to persuade the court you're in Category A. Because once you're in Category A, you win, right? Once you get yourself into permanent land, you win. But once you're in temporary, man, you're stuck with Penn Central and you have a hard time. So the downside to these categorical approaches is trying to pigeonhole everything into rigid categories. If you remember from your common law, it's strict scrutiny, right? If you're in strict scrutiny, man, you win, you're good. But if you're in the rational basis, you're screwed, right? So this categorical approach forces you to check off one or the other. Which box are you checking off?
Kind of going with that a little bit. In your experience, clerking for a judge or two, when attorneys submitted briefs, was there any kind of sway if they wrote their brief in more of an emotional sense, talking about how their client was being deprived rather than policy and being really dry about it?
So the question is writing your briefs in an emotional tone more effective? No. Let me put it this way. If you're having a jury trial, that may be a little bit more effective, but if a judge and his law clerks are reading a brief and it's laden with emotions, you suspect they're covering up for a lack of legal arguments, right? There's an expression, right? If you have the law, argue the law. If you have the facts, argue the facts. If you have neither, pound the table, right? So you always want to lead off with the laws on your side and the facts on your side, but if you have neither and giving this emotional stuff, you're probably not the best at it. But a very good question. But I would say in a jury trial, there's a different approach because you are trying to tug at the heartstrings of jurors. Judges are pretty, not always, but they're probably a little more jaded, and they're less likely to jump on the emotion bandwagon. But it happens. Okay. So Justice Blackmun's dissent makes, I think, one point that's not rebutted, which is a smoke detector question, right? If the rule is that installing something with a hammer and nail, like a cable TV wire, or a smoke alarm, or whatever, if that's a taking, then virtually all these landlord-tenant laws are unconstitutional. Now, 30 years later, no one has struck down laws requiring the installation of smoke detectors. So this is a, I don't want to call it an outlier, but it establishes a rule that doesn't actually apply, right? It establishes a rule that the court promptly decides to ignore. Okay? All right. So, any questions on Loretto? Right? This case gives us a rule. When you have a permanent physical occupation, you have to install a wire. It's a taking. You get your money. There's no balancing at all. But if it falls outside this, we have only a temporary physical invasion. You go down to the balancing test we discussed next class. And by the way, you're going to thank me for not doing Penn Central first. You're going to hate that. Trust me. So I just think, oh, Black, why didn't Penn Central? Trust me, this is better. Robert.
Did you say somewhere that they mentioned that smoke detectors are outside?
There's a footnote about that, isn't there? Oh, was it cut out of your book?
I'm not sure.
No, it's in there.
Oh, yeah.
It's page 1140.
Thank you. Yeah, it drives me nuts because I know the stuff that's actually there, and often when you edit a book, they cut stuff out.
It's at the bottom of the opinion.
So you have to finish reading till the end?
Yeah.
Okay, it's there, trust me. But there's a footnote about smoke detectors. Okay, other questions on Loretto? Okay. Anthony Durando? No. Okay. Let's do the next case, the raising case. I like this case. Everyone else like this case a little bit more? I love the raising case, right? Christina, give us the raising case, Horn.
By the Department of Agriculture that requires raisin growers to set aside a certain percentage of raisins to the government, and then they would determine how to sell that portion or dispose of it the way they saw fit.
Very good.
And the growers would retain an interest in the proceeds that they would get.
Very good. Let me ask you a follow-up question. How does it promote an orderly raisin market to remove raisins off the market and ship them overseas? What's the reasoning there?
There's more exposure.
What do you mean more exposure?
Other people that would normally not get those raisins.
Christina, how do you increase the price of raisins? How is the government trying to increase the price of raisins here? What are they doing by shipping raisins off overseas? Yeah. This is the New Deal, right? During the New Deal, there were all these theories that the way to help farmers is to increase the prices of produce. And the way to increase prices of produce is to decrease the supply, right? When you make something more scarce, the price goes up. So literally what this regime does is it removes raisins from the market and sends it elsewhere, overseas to another market. And what they tell the farmers is, if you play along with us, and you give us your raisins, we'll give you a cut of the money generated from these sales. So in other words, they're artificially depressing the supply of raisins in the United States, making it more expensive for us to buy, California raisins, Raisinets, and everything else, right? And then they're giving the farmers a cutback wherever they sell from abroad. Now sometimes this makes them money, sometimes it loses money. The Horns objected to this. They said that this is a taking. And I love this case because it's a good application. It's not in your book yet. I think it'll be the next edition, hopefully. I love this case because it's an application of Loretto that's very easy to understand, right? So Mia, how does the court, and by the way, you don't get to read good opinions very often. Chief Justice Roberts drives me crazy. He's such a good writer. This is one of my favorite opinions ever read. I love it. let them have wine, right? No, let them eat grapes. Like there's just so many good lines. He even he refers to the oysters as fairy naturae. Remember that from Pierce to Post? He's so good. Drives me nuts, but he's. If you want to read good writing, Bradley, you're asking, read Roberts' briefs when he was a lawyer. They were so good. Kagan's close, but Roberts still the best one. Scalia was best, but now Roberts I think has the #1 spot. Drives me crazy though. Yeah.
Does he bother you because of Obamacare?
How'd you know? Yeah. So how does the chief, or our dear Chief Justice, apply the Loretto test for the raisins case?
Well, he says that it is a taking, and I think that it would fall in the permanent physical occupation.
Now, why does Roberts think it's a permanent physical occupation, Mia?
Because they're not really getting, like, they say that they have the farmers still have a stake in the, raisins that they're taking away, but they don't really have it. Say, 1 year they get, a little bit back, and then the next year they get nothing back.
Very good. So what the chief says is, look, this is an easy application of Loretto. He has this image, again, this one is such a good writer, that they pull up with a truck at 8 o'clock in the morning, right, expecting to dump these raisins, and no. Right? It's like they're in the dark of night, they're stealing his raisins, right? Not exactly. But he's very good. Because they're literally taking the raisins away, Robert says, this is a complete, permanent physical occupation of the raisins. They literally hand over the raisins to the government, right? Now, Taylor, Justice Sotomayor's dissent describes the facts very differently. Does she think that this is a complete deprivation of the property interest in the raisins?
No, she harps on the fact that Loretto applied a complete taking of the bundle.
Good.
And because they still had the interest in profiting off the extra.
Very good. Very good.
They didn't, it's not per se.
Excellent. Perfect. Very right. So Justice Sotomayor, she had a solo dissent, and she's like, look, this is not an accurate characterization of the record, right? She wrote this good line. She said, it's not the case that government agents acting pursuant to the order are storming raisin farms in the dark of night to load raisins onto trucks, right? So I think the chief, again, had a little fun with his flourish, and I think Sotomayor caught him on that one, which is fair enough. But what she's saying is, they do have at least one stick in the bundle, right? They have at least one stick in the bundle. That stick in the bundle is the potential for profit from the sale of these excess raisins. So what Sotomayor is arguing in dissent is, in order to have a violation of Loretto, you need to have a complete destruction of every stick in the bundle, right? If there's any remaining residual left over, right? Anything left over, you're in temporary. You're in Penn Central land. So Sotomayor would apply the Penn Central balancing test to find that this occupation is not physical. Okay? So everyone just get the distinction, right? Robert says, duh, they're taking the raisins, that's permanent. Sotomayor says, well, they're taking the raisins, but you have this future profit interest, so it's not completely physical. It's not completely 100%. The important point here is that Sotomayor was just one vote and the other were 8. So this view of Loretto that requires such a strict reading did not prevail. So I think the rule for you to understand is, even if you could potentially profit from these raisins, that doesn't matter. Let's go back to Loretto, right? Could Loretto charge a higher rent for a building because they have cable TV?
Yeah.
She could, right? So the mere fact that you may benefit from this physical taking is irrelevant. Roberts makes this point. I think Marshall makes this point. The complete deprivation of your interest, the extinguishing of your bundle of sticks, that's a taking. The good stuff that may come after it is irrelevant. And that may go towards, again, your compensation, right? It may be the case that the money being paid out from this program is your compensation, in the same sense that the $1 from here, from Loretto, was for compensation. But that is a secondary question. The primary question, is there a taking? Bradley.
That's where I'm confused is the timing with the compensation, because I have not a fear, but a thought about double dipping. Getting compensated, but also getting compensated again.
So you think the horns are being unjust enrichment?
I mean, potentially. I don't know what happened, but I'm wondering in cases like this, how the timing works. Does the government just pay them right away, and then because of this law, they get paid for the raisins that they already got paid for?
So this is what the government, I think Justice Sotomayor are arguing, right? That there's potential for unjust enrichment. That he's going to get the compensation for taking the raisins, and he's going to get the value from being in this program, right? So I think what ultimately happened in this case is whatever money they got from the program was going to be offset by what they were owed. So let's just say I make up a number. Let's say the value of the raisins were $500,000, making up a number, and that this program would pay out $250,000. Okay, they get the $250,000 and then pay another $250,000 on top of it. Now, the better question is what happens if the value of the raisins was $500,000 and that this program paid out $1 million, right? So they get the above and beyond. I think they're capped off, right? You can't have your raisins equal too. You can't claim at the same time there's a taking and benefit from the program. I think you're capped off at the value of the raisins. At the very end, the Chief Justice has his one line and says, this case has gone on long enough, let's just end it here. And what you probably didn't know is that this case came to the court once before. Mm-hmm. Okay? So the holding in this case, the reason why I like teaching it, it's a very easy and fun to read application of Loretto, but it rejects the Sotomayor dissent, which says you need to have a complete destruction of all rights. Here, even the potential for future profit is sufficient to get you out of Penn Central land. Okay? All right, so any questions on the raisin case? I love this case. It was such a fun case to study. Most of these facts are usually very boring. This one's good facts. Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Please.
Why would they apply Loretto instead of, say, like union cases, where you're taking money, you're requiring people to pay dues?
Oh man,
Wouldn't it be the
you're
same
going
thing?
there, aren't you? So the question about whether dues can be taken out of a salary for a union is a First Amendment issue, right? Not a takings question. It implicates what's called the right of association. And there's a case at the Supreme Court this term that I think in all likelihood will hold that unions can no longer deduct dues from the salaries of various government employees. So they're related, but not the same. I think they'll come out the same way. Questions? Yeah, Yusuf.
The last line in the case says this case in litigation for more than a decade.
Yeah.
Going on long.
Yeah.
How long did it?
I think it almost 15 years by the end of it. I think it started in 2002. Does that sound right? I think it started in 2002, and the final decision was like in 2015 or 16. So a long time. And I mean, you can imagine this is like a farmer family, and they probably are hated by all the other farmers in this cooperative who like to have this program to dump their raisins in the market. One note, though, I'll mention it briefly. You studied in common law a case called Wickard v. Filburn. And this was a case where Congress said to a farmer that you can't grow more than a certain amount of wheat or else we'll fine you. Commerce Clause case. So the government can tell you not to grow wheat, but if they allow you to grow it, they can't then take it from you. So one might say, why can't the government just say, don't grow the raisins at all? Under the case law, that's possible. Don't grow the raisins at all. Okay. So any other questions on that? All right, Lane, let's do Hadachek, which is an oldie but a goodie. What was Mr. Hadachek trying to do here?
Well, he had a piece of property that had a clay on it that he used to make a bed of clay.
Good.
To make bricks.
Good.
And it was outside the city limits when he bought it. But then at some point the city of Los Angeles expanded its borders, and his property was now in the city limits.
Good.
And where his piece of property was, they said he couldn't use it.
Good, yeah.
And so he filed a suit. Well, first of all, the property was more valuable as for the commercial uses
Very good.
than as the residential use that they wanted to use it for, the city said he had to use it for. And so we filed a suit saying that against the validity of the ordinance, basically saying I was invalid.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Very good. So, this should remind you of a case you probably read in towards called Del Webb. Does that sound familiar? The coming to the nuisance doctrine, right? This is where they built the feedlot and all these other residential communities kind of got closer and closer. So here we have a guy, Mr. Hadachek, who built a very big brickyard in the outskirts of Los Angeles. And I did the math. They said the tract was about 800 grand. That's like $20 million in present day values. We're talking like, very significant real estate. And the land was basically only useful for making brick. It wasn't really useful for anything else. As the city expanded, they came closer and closer and said, okay, now you're within LA limits. You can't build, you can't occupy this brickyard. And it was actually a criminal conviction. I never really paid attention to it until this semester. The guy was in jail, right? The guy was literally incarcerated for running a business. He said, you can't deprive me of the value of my land. Now, Emma, did they actually take his land away from him?
No.
Did they actually make him install anything on his land?
No.
What was the extent of this regulation, or criminal statute, to say?
Well, it prevented him from using the land for its best value.
Good.
To make brick.
So, doesn't this case remind you of something else we've studied recently? See if you can remember. What cases remind you of telling you how you can use your land? Good. What case am I thinking of? Exactly right.
One where it was like the free.
Good. What was the name of the case? Very good. That's
It was on the first one we did.
I know it was. It's okay. Anyone else on the name of the case? Was it? Someone. You're really close. Say it again.
I don't know how to say it. I'm really bad.
Euclid. Yeah, I think you said Euclid, right? You were like 2 letters off. Yeah, Euclid, right? So Emma, let's finish up. So in Euclid, they said, this chunk was residential, this chunk was commercial, this chunk was industrial, right? Did the court uphold that sort of slicing and dicing? They did. This case was about a decade or so before Euclid. But what it represents is the beginning of land use, right? And the mere fact the government tells you how to use your land does not mean it's unconstitutional. Why? It's within the police power to eliminate nuisance, right? What the court says here is that the running of this kiln and the running of this brick making operation could be a nuisance. And under the police power, the government can control land use to eliminate this nuisance. Right? Now, Bradley, were there any complaints or any allegations that this was actually bothering anyone?
I didn't read.
No.
I didn't read this case.
Oh, okay. Alex, were there any allegations that there was a nuisance, people were bothered by this brick making operation? No. So then why is the government trying to shut it down?
I think they just didn't want it within like the city limits anymore.
Very good, right? So what this case represents is the police power is really broad. And even if there are no actual complaints, right, it's not actually bothering anyone, the city can still shut it down. So when it comes to a nuisance, the city can use its police power to regulate the use of land. Okay? This is an important concept because we just studied in Loretto that the police power doesn't allow them to make you install something. So why don't you think about this for a minute? Miss Loretto got a successful takings claim because she had to install a 1-inch cable on her wall. Mr. Hadachek lost his $20 million business and didn't get a damn penny for it because there was no physical occupation. So there's an oddity here, right? If the government physically occupies your land, you win. Not a lot of money, but you win. Here, Mr. Hadachek lost his entire business, got nothing for it. He was actually in jail. Again, this was a habeas corpus writ, right? The guy was in jail for running a clay business. He got nothing. So there's this weird divide in takings law that, going back to, I think I asked this question to William a few minutes ago, if you're a lawyer and you get yourself into Loretto land, you get your money. But if you fall down and you say this is not physical, it's temporary, it's balancing, you're going to lose. So depending how you slot yourself at the outset makes a big deal. Yes, Justin.
So you just said that the city can use its police power to regulate the use of land if it could be a nuisance. How do they determine what can and can't be a nuisance if there's no complaint?
So you'll read a case.
Broad discretion.
You'll read a case next week when Justice Busby's lecturing called Lucas versus South Carolina Coastal Commission, and that's a Scalia opinion from the 90s, and they go into the idea of what is a nuisance. That case concerns a building moratorium where the government said you can't build any property on the shoreline, right? And the government said, wait a minute, we're just trying to stop a nuisance, right? And so they said, no, these sorts of environmental policies are not common law nuisances. So at least the Scalia opinion said we look towards common law principles of what a nuisance is. Baking brick and making smoke, I think, would probably fit under common law nuisance.
But so for 75 years, they didn't really have any regulations of what was.
Nope. And this guy was running his business just fine without any problems.
So where did the arbitrary argument come in?
Oh, good, Chester. So, I actually only figured this out last night. I've taught this case a dozen times. I never actually thought about this. This wasn't necessarily even a takings case. This was more of a due process case. And I'm sure you studied a case called Lochner, right? This is a violation of the right of liberty. He was saying this is an arbitrary, using Chester's word, right? An arbitrary restriction on my right. If I want to be a brickmaker and have the soil that's suitable for it, not bothering anyone, I can do it. This is not a Lochner-esque case because the court said that we can regulate it because it's within the police power of land use. It's this weird intersection of economic liberty and land use. They fit together. Actually, this morning I sent a note to the South Texas Library. I want to go read the briefs in this case because I'm pretty sure he was citing Lochner in his briefs. I'm going to pull it up and see what the answers later. But this is a case, this is not just land use, but also economic liberty under the Due Process Clause, which argues, is this an arbitrary usage of government power? Okay? Anthony.
Is this still good law today? Would he still lose under Penn Central?
Well, this is 1915. Penn Central hadn't been decided yet.
Yeah, but today.
So, I'm going to answer your question in a minute, right? It'll take me a minute. Our takings law is like a puzzle, right? So we have these various decisions. We have had a check. You'll study a case next class called Penn Colby Mahon, 1920s. Another case called Penn Central. Okay. Another case called Lucas. And another case called Tahoe Sierra. And another case called Wisconsin v. Merv, decided a couple months ago. These cases keep screwing up what came before. They keep making it more and more complicated. So let me try to summarize this lesson as easily as I can. Hope and pray you get a question on categorical takings. Those are easy. If you fall into this category, it's very straightforward. If you're not, we go to the Penn Central test. And the Penn Central test has lots of different factors, but the size of the incursion and the reliance interest. Deciding whether it's a taking or Penn Central is much tougher. Preview, the government usually wins, but it's a harder analysis. So Anthony, all these cases are good law, right? None of them are overturned. They all fit together in a really weird way. It's like you smash things up, but you have to know all these cases. And unfortunately, for the exam, you need to walk through all of them, right? This is, if you just cite how to check on your exam, you're probably wrong. On these sorts of takings questions, you're probably going to have to cite Loretto, right? How to check, Penn Cole, Penn Central, Lucas, Tahoe Sierra, Merv. You have to walk through this analysis. And I'll help you with this in the next week or two. But this is not like, you cite Pierce v. Post, our rule of capture, right? The takings doctrine has been developed by the court on 6 or 7 cases, and you need to know this trend, this line of cases.
So you would be required in one of the 5 questions to walk through 6 cases.
Depending what the facts are. I mean, you might stop at one case, right? If it's categorical, you stop at Loretto. But depending on the nature of the case, you might have different things you have to discuss. We'll walk through this.
I'm having a hard time understanding what how to check falls.
How to check is not a taking, right? Under Penn Central, which we'll talk about next week, Penn Central decides is taking or is it a police power, right?
So we determined that this was a police power.
Because it's about nuisance, right? So if you're regulating a nuisance, it's under the police power, it's not a taking. You don't need Penn Central.
So I wouldn't, in my notes, I would put down the category.
Right, so if the exam question was about a nuisance, you wouldn't necessarily need Penn Central. You can stop with how to check. This is just this question. But there are lots of regulations that are not for nuisances, in which case you do need to go to the Penn Central test. I told you this would be complicated. This will make more sense after class on Thursday. Yes, Yusuf.
Have we talked about the actual taking yet? Or, is that like the raisins and actual taking?
Raisins, taking. The phone cable, Loretto, taking, right? Those are actual taking, fire compensation. Yeah.
So the court in Categorical was basically saying that you couldn't manufacture the bricks there, but you could still take them out of the ground, move it to another place.
Yeah. In other words, you could extract the soil, the clay, move it somewhere else, and bake the brick somewhere else, even though it's very expensive, not a good way of using resources. No, it makes no sense. Which is why I think Chester's point is right. I think you brought a claim to Locking thing is arbitrary. That right? I can dig the clay, but I can't bake it here. And honestly, baking clay doesn't really make that much smoke. It doesn't make that much noxious gas. It's a pretty clean process for making bricks. All right, let me try to synthesize a bit. I told you this topic gets complicated more and more each class. Whenever SCOTUS gets involved, it screws stuff up. I like common law stuff, it makes it easier. So when you're looking at a takings question, your first question is, what is the nature of the taking? If you can find this as categorical, it's a permanent physical occupation, you're done. Stop. Full stop. You're good. If it's something less than that, maybe it's like a temporary flooding, you're not in Loretto anymore. You have to go on to the other tests, right? And your other tests are going to be Categorical, you have Penn Central, you have Penn Cole, Lucas Tahoe, Murr. If you have a nuisance, you stop at Categorical, right? If it's not a nuisance, if it's say a regulation of how tall your building can be, you went to Penn Central. If the regulation concerns, moratorium on building, that you can't build anymore, you're probably going to go on to Lucas and Tahoe Sierra. You'll have to figure out from the facts of whatever question I give you what the relevant precedent is. And it's not going to be easy. I'm warning you, this is a tough topic. But we will walk through it, I promise. Anything else? I will see some of you today, and hopefully the rest of you this week. So thank you so much.